Hello and welcome to America in Context Live. It's about 1:40 on the East Coast. It's about 10:40 on the West Coast. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about a subject that is going to, some people are not going to be happy with it. I'll just say that. It may raise a few eyebrows, but it is something that needs to be addressed. It's that the concept of American exceptionalism, the term itself, needs to be retired. Now I'm saying this because a few weeks ago, on the heels of the High Holy Days in the Jewish faith, I saw an unfortunate reminder that anti-Semitism in the United States is alive and well. A vehicle owned by a federal law enforcement agency had a poster of Hitler inside the dashboard of the car. This is in Brooklyn, New York, which is shocking anywhere. It's especially shocking here. And it's really appalling, but it's frankly not that surprising. In fact, the Anti-Defamation League found that recently that 24 million Americans foster anti-Semitic attitudes, which is a direct result of a nationalist and populist identity and thought process. So these changes, or these not necessarily changes, but this mentality is as a result of populist leaders becoming more and more prominent around the globe, from members of our own government in the United States, all around the world, from Brazil to India, and the UK. So the United States is clearly, obviously, no exception. The United States, throughout its history, has targeted marginalized groups. That's no surprise to anyone. As communities of color, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, women, etc., they can all attest that this is nothing new. In fact, hate is as American and ingrained in our identity as apple pie. So continuing, and stories kind of continue to surface from the U.S.-Mexico border to treatments in the troubled teen industry. They're all very inhumane. And pundits go on cable television and say things like, this is not who we are. But let's be honest, this is exactly who we are. And the sooner that we acknowledge that, the sooner that we can fix that problem. Now, what's really a very positive thing about the American identity and part of our strengths is that our resting pulse is discontent, that every day we thrive to be better than we were yesterday. Given that has a different meaning to different people, regardless on what side of the aisle you are, regardless of what side of the aisle you happen to be on, your definition is different. But this idea of America first, that we're number one without actually showing anything for it, that is only emboldened by catchy buzzword and populist campaign slogans, really do not bode well to progress and adhering to the values that we stand for. Ultimately, we do have a few things that the United States is number one in, but they're not exactly things you want to be proud of. Mass incarceration, for example. We lead the world in COVID deaths. According to Johns Hopkins University, almost 218,000 people, about the equivalent of the population of Tacoma, Washington, in its entirety currently have died from the virus. And the number of cases from the virus in the United States is 7.9 million. That's 618,000 more than the next leading country, which is India, which also happens to have a populist leader. And, we can get into all different kinds of issues here and talk about how there's a problem and that we need to really own our problems in order to fix them. So joining me to discuss is Francesca Fiorentini. She's the host of News Broke on AJ Plus, the Bituation Room podcast, and she hosted the Red, White, and Blue and Who,
yes,
special on MSNBC. She's joining me now. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Andy. I love this topic. So important. I'm glad we're digging into it.
Well, so you've actually spoken about this a bit before, the idea of American exceptionalism, and that is, undermining our values in and of itself. Can you speak on, like, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, just responding to this title, right? Is American exceptionalism un-American? I love it because I never really thought about it that way. I feel like American exceptionalism is one of those myths, like Pocahontas, like Thanksgiving, slavery was going to end anyway, and civil rights were totally going to happen by themselves. White people were definitely going to give black people the right to vote eventually. It's like one of those myths, and that you are taught as a child, which basically is American exceptionalism, because we have to sort of get our definitions right, is that the U.S. is the best country in the world. And by best, we mean the most democratic. It's got the democracy. You got the freedom of speech. You got the freedom of assembly and the other freedoms that Amy Coney Barrett couldn't mention. So those are the ways that we sort of herald the democratic aspect of the United States. But then we actually break it down, and we're on the cusp of an election and seeing all the ways that voter suppression is horribly rampant, that the Electoral College, which is a vestige of slavery in and of itself, still exists in the year 2020. Even the ways that we are exceptional, which supposedly was our democracy, is falling apart and is more laid bare as being broken and actually not true. And I think, to your point about COVID, and the fact that I think it's ironic, the fact that we are so exceptional now under this pandemic points to the fact that we've been so up our own butts, if you will, about our exceptionalism and how we're so great. Like, but we're the best. Like, why do we have we're the best. We're the best. We're the best. It's actually that we've been letting it slide, that we are so tied to the myth, we aren't actually doing the hard work to make sure that our country doesn't slide into populism, doesn't have unfettered runaway capitalism, which inhibits a response to a global pandemic to take care of people, right? So we're so tied to the myth, man. We're like an old rapper from the 80s or something, we're like an old, who's just washed up. We're like a very David Hasselhoff country where it's like, but we used to be like the tough guy and whatever. And now we're not. We're washed up.
Yeah, I think of the movie Napoleon Dynamite, and Uncle Rico. He's like, "Oh, I was really great on the football team," and that is like he peaked in high school.
Totally, America peaked in high school.
Exactly, and I think that there's a lot of our values, and if you don't interpret them as literal, the creed there, this want to be better, this the idea of the American dream to want the best for you and your family is a universal great thing that people want. But getting there, that definition, trying to put that into something tangible is where people have really kind of gotten lost. I want to bring up a figure here from U.S. News and World Report. The U.S. ranks number 7 in the world overall on quality of life. Overall, but on quality of life, as of 2019, the U.S. sits at number 17. It's really kind of curious where that reading will go from there, after this pandemic. It is to be said that there was this pandemic. It's unprecedented. There was no good way to respond to it, but there is a way to make a bad situation worse. So I will say that there is there's no good way that this could have been handled, but the way that the administration has dealt with this has made a bad situation.
But the thing that the president has doubled down on is this idea of American exceptionalism. I mean, you can imagine, right? If and when China takes over, oh my God, can it be soon enough? Because I'm very tired. But no, they will have Chinese exceptionalism, which to them would be look, we are an economic powerhouse in the world, and sure, there are giant camps where we have our Muslim minority in, but like that's Chinese exceptionalism. Exceptionalism in the world is all about hegemony, and it's all about saying, sure, the United States has toppled democratically elected governments all over the world, and yeah, there was Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera, torture and whatnot, but we are the good guys. It's sort of positioning yourself as always being the good guys. And the problem with that is you're never critical of your actual country. And you never get like, if what is good, it reminds me of the sketch, the Are We the Baddies sketch. I'm gonna forget, someone in the comments remind me what the sketch group was. But it's like, are we the baddies? Like the US needs to stop and be like, wait, are we the baddies? Like, are we on the wrong side of history right now? But when you consider yourself exceptional, you're kind of given that free ride to never have to interrogate what you're doing. And I think to your point initially about the anti-Semitism, perfect example, because the United States was always like, well, Hitler didn't conquer the US. We stopped the World War II. We stopped Hitler kind of late, very late. But we position ourselves as being the heroes in World War II, and that's sort of where the American exceptionalism starts. But then we don't turn around and see all the ways that, whether it's Black Americans, immigrants, and yes, Jewish Americans, the ways that we're allowing the same bigotry and anti-Semitism to infect, and fascism to infect our own country. So it's like, but we're exempt from that, right? Because we're the goodies.
I mean, there's what's the saying? For those who don't understand history are bound to repeat it, and that that says a lot. I'm sure there are people in the comments who are calling us anti-American communists.
Nah, they're all cool.
Yeah,
they're all cool.
I bet. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you can't be exceptional unless you can look at your own faults and try, at least give it a solid attempt to address those issues. And until we say, you know what, we're great, but we're not that great, or there's a lot of room for improvement, we could do better in this area, that's when things will turn up. And let's talk about COVID for a second, because sure, for whatever it's worth, COVID has pointed out a lot of systematic inequalities that were obvious to a lot of people, but the people that were kind of that are in the seat to make a difference and change those policies are finally starting to recognize that that's an issue. So there is some level of positivity there. There are a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong, but there is some steps there. What's your take on that?
I mean, when it comes to COVID, Joe Biden had a town hall last night at the same time that Trump had a town hall, and I was watching Biden because mental health, and he had some really cogent and great answers to the COVID question. What he didn't say, and what has been striking to me on all sides of the aisle during this entire pandemic, is he didn't talk about the rest of the world. He didn't say, let's look to South Korea, let's look to Germany, let's look to other countries that have successfully kept their death rates and their infection rates lower. Let's join with the rest of the world. Again, this is a global pandemic. We don't have borders. You want to talk about borders? Like, yeah, put up some border, build a wall against a coronavirus. Bro, you can't. And so what letting go of our American exceptionalism means is actually embracing a certain amount of internationalism. And that means learning from the other people we share this world with. That means coming together and doing things like the Paris Climate Agreement and going even farther than that. But again, if you want to always be on the top of the heap, you don't even have to prove it with like better infrastructure, schools, healthcare, whatever. Just get a lot of guns, huge military, and just enforce the idea that you're the best by, aggressing against the rest of the world. Problem is, we're now in a ton of debt because of all of those wars. You can't really sustain constant war all the time just to enforce your superiority. So here we are. It's a perfect moment for a little bit of internationalism, Andy. And like, man, I'm struggling to find it. I'm struggling to find out where the U.S., is actually looking at other countries, is meeting with global. I want the CDC to meet with the CDC equivalents of the rest of the world. Wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah. So two things I want to point out there. Just a little points of clarification in terms of some of the Trump people would say the president closed the border, the flights to China at some point, which needed to be done, which was a decision it was a good decision. However, it was far too late for that to happen. In fact, numerous reports suggest that in the first major hotspot in the country, New York City, the cases came from Europe, not Asia.
Right.
So,
and the other thing was, let's just be clear. He stopped travel from China, but only for Chinese nationals. Only if you were like a Chinese national, not if you were an American, not if you were a Chinese American, which doesn't make any sense because once again, COVID is colorblind. COVID doesn't care where you were born, where you come from. So he allowed everyone who was all in China to come back in the US. You should stop anyone. Doesn't matter where they were born. Doesn't matter what passport they hold. They shouldn't be allowed to come back from this epicenter to the US. So it made no sense.
No, it didn't. It really, I agree. I was telling a friend of mine at the time, it's like if your ultimate goal was to curb the virus from getting to the United States, you can't have anyone come back. You have to just say no one's coming in or out.
Right.
Like
exactly
until this is over, we're no one in, no one out. But the selectivity of what that is just it's
the American businessman will cause a fit if he's not allowed to come back from China.
I mean, that's ultimately what it was. Speaking of which, a recent report from the World Economic Forum has suggested, and this was before the pandemic, that the U.S., this is 2016, 2017, that the U.S. slipped to number 3 in its global competitiveness, economically speaking. So, this trade war, and I spoke about this in a previous episode, but this trade war with China is really doing a lot more harm than it is good, regardless of what way you look at this. Like from a trade perspective, it's not great. Mm-hmm. It's not helping, farmers and workers in the United States. It's actually doing the opposite. One of the major reasons that the United States has made concessions with China on trade is because they're one of North Korea's few trading partners, and keeping them at bay is important. So while that's not an economic incentive, that's kind of a national security incentive.
Right.
And that is also rather concerning that the White House, or the president in particular, doesn't seem to grasp that all of these relationships are purely transactional. Sure. And that really is something that just makes this situation that much worse.
I mean, I think it's also the trade thing is that's a whole other conversation, because the fact of the matter is you can't have decades of neoliberalism and global capital flying all over the country, jobs, abandoning the United States like a sinking ship. And have all kinds of consensus between Wall Street and the government, left and right sides of the aisle. Remember, the only time the Republicans stood up for Obama was when he was trying to pass the TPP. Oh, Orrin Hatch cried. Boy, did he cry. He cried. It was like, oh, your president wants you to pass the TPP. Democrats were like, we don't know if more free trade policies is what this country needs. Then you get Trump, who's like, well, we're exceptional. We're the best. We can make everything here. Well, bro, with what? We can't make anything here. This is you're living in an unreality. You don't live in the year 2020. Now, you want to go back to like coal-fired, coal-powered plants and everything like that. Like, you know how much work it would take to get back to wherever he wants us to get back to, 60s, 70s industrialization with these antiquated, outdated forms of industry. Like, so all of this selling you on American manufacturing is another way of selling American exceptionalism that is completely out of step with reality. Now, that doesn't mean that you say, well, all of our jobs go abroad. You can have some amount of national industry. That doesn't mean national industry and the striving to keep jobs here and good jobs here is bad. But you can't go about it in this bizarre xenophobic way that negates this consensus that's been around for decades.
Yeah, I mean, you could say these towns that have historically been built on these, as for mining coal. Hey, right. These guys have a certain set of skills, and this set of skills could easily be transferable into the manufacturing of solar panels or the manufacturing of wind turbines,
right?
Or things like that. It's an adaptation with the times, and that cities around the country recognize that if they stay with one industry as the dominant industry within that city, or as the only major industry within that city, then they're banking on they're almost in their entire identity on one thing.
Absolutely.
As we've seen, just like as an example with Detroit. I mean, it was once one of the epicenters, if not the epicenter of U.S. commerce because of the auto industry. When there was a downturn in the auto industry, they progressively lost their place in the powerhouse of the American economy, which is unfortunate. But part of mitigating that problem, which a lot of cities, especially in Texas, in the South, and increasingly in the Rust Belt, have said, you know what, we can't, we have an industry that our city has been built on, but we can't rely on our entire identity being attached to that.
I think someone said import substitution industrialization, which never worked well in Latin America. Beluga Blues said, and that's like what you're saying is exactly right. Just as, a so-called banana republic, enforcing a single economy or a single industry economy on any, whether it's an entire country for export, or if it's a city in this country like Detroit, like the auto industry, like you're saying, that's not good. That doesn't work. We need mixed economies. We need local economies, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do want to make one thing absolutely clear, because I am fairly certain that there's going to be a pushback that says, oh, this was, some super left-wing liberal, talking points that this is not a partisan issue. Like, this is the basic fundamental American creed of growth, of innovation, of democracy, of really building out fundamentally where everybody on both sides of the aisle at least claim that's what they stand for. And so we really shouldn't be looking at this as a partisan conversation, but rather getting back or embracing the values that we claim that we have. And I really hope that that's the discussion that comes out of this. I really hope, knowing Twitter, I doubt that'll be the case.
No, I think there are some smart people in the comments, and I think folks are ready to move on to a new conversation. The question is that I think we need a leader, and I hope Joe Biden is this leader, but we all need to be that leader who says, enough with American exceptionalism. Like, we need, in fact, it's not a point of weakness to learn from other people on the planet. It's not a point of weakness if you move money from the military into infrastructure. That's not weakness, that's strength. It's a point of strength to have a record number of college graduates. It's a point of strength to have limited debt, individual debt. It's a point of strength when you have homeowners in this country. I mean, God, folks of our generation and younger will not be able to own a home the way we're going. It is a point of strength to not have massive income inequality. So that is where we have, I think the real question is, what are the values, right? As you're saying, do you value strength? Is it about strength? Military strength. Is it military strength and being able to say, I'm right, you're wrong, and if you say that I'm wrong, then I'm going to roll up a tank in your town? Is that what it is? Or is it real safety? Is it real, a community that doesn't get torn apart from climate change, economic inequality, all the things?
I want to get to climate change in a second, but just for a point of clarity, that there is historically there has been huge economic innovation that's come along with war, in World War II, for example.
Yes, sure.
So that has played a very positive, in some respects, it has played a positive role, but that was a very different kind of.
No, but Andy, it's such a good point, dude, because I'm sorry, I'm going to dude you and forgive me, that's the California in me. But this is the thing, is I was looking back on, you could really compare COVID to World War II. And wow, we manufactured so much and the country pulled together and people, took metal off of their homes in order to send it in for the war effort. And they were happy to pay their taxes. We all banded together, but that's because it was for war and beating, and going into battle, I'm not saying it wasn't valiant, but if we are currently in a war, which we are against not a foreign enemy, but the coronavirus, then where is that same innovation? Where is that same pulling together as a nation to actually get out of this and to help people?
I think that there is a lot actually going on there, but some of the policies coming from Washington have really undermined the efforts to do that.
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical companies are actually kind of pulling their weight. There's something they did a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago, that really surprised me, that they were coming up with a monoclonal antibody treatment. They were sharing trade secrets, which is
right. Supposedly we don't do, but
so, I mean, some people are really stepping up. Members of communities are stepping up to help, other people. People are really trying to help out their, local restaurants and try and keep them in business. So there's a lot of very positives coming out, but the support from Washington to an extent is just not there.
For sure.
It's just not there. So I do want to say that there is clearly a push from people looking past politics, working together to come up with a solution, but it is nowhere near on par with what it should be, or in other points throughout our history, and the stakes are just as high.
Someone's asking that people flee to the U.S. Why, if it's so dismal? The U.S. has come to the aid of countless countries. Well, I would dispute maybe that we've come to the aid of countless countries, but I do think it is interesting to say, well, hey, if America's so bad, why do people want to come here? And you have to look at where they are coming from. Let's talk about our hemisphere, right? We look at Central America and Central American migrants, which make up a huge number of the migrants coming into the United States and have historically. There is a great documentary called The Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez of Democracy Now! And he's a journalist, great journalist. And it basically says that all of the places that the United States has helped overthrow and coups and supposedly in service of democracy, the economies being forced on those countries, all of that has meant for waves and waves and waves of immigration into the United States. It hasn't been because things are bad in their country in a vacuum. It's because the United States has helped made things so terrible in those countries, right? You've got, for example, every war that the United States has ever been involved in is closely followed by a huge wave of migration from the country we were at war in. So in the Korean War, you had then a huge migration of Koreans. In the Vietnam War, you then had a huge migration of Vietnamese. We've done this over and over and over again. And of course, in Central America in the 80s and the many different wars that we were involved in, on smaller levels, then came home to roost. So sadly, yes, I'm not saying this is a bad country. I'm not saying this is El Salvador at all. But why is El Salvador the way it is now, right? And a lot of that has to do with U.S. policy, foreign policy.
That's a good point. One last thing I want to get to. Peter raised a very interesting point. What's your take on very interesting question, excuse me. What's your take on the Green New Deal?
Are you asking me or you go ahead?
Yeah. I mean, that's his question. So the Green New Deal, there's a lot there. But in terms of the idea of American exceptionalism, yes, we are from the United States. Whoever asked, so that was a question.
Born and raised.
Born and raised. The question about the Green New Deal is all of the things that come along with that really feed into this way that the United States could really be that much more exceptional. Jobs, leading the world on climate policy, essentially retrofitting fundamentally our entire identity is what this would do.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, to an extent, and to Joe Biden's credit, he has at some level adopted some of the things that progressives have put up. Not as much as he should, but to give him credit, he is adopting some of those things. And just from an international agreement standpoint, beyond climate, entering back into the Paris Climate Accord says that, hey, on all of these international issues, we're willing to come to the table if everyone else is.
Right. So, I mean, I think the Green New Deal is even a better example than coronavirus is for an opportunity created by a crisis in order to rapidly industrialize, but in a green way, to meet this crisis. Think of it as our World War II, right? Climate change is absolutely a national security threat to each and every one of us. And you're talking about refugees and migrants. We are going to be seeing refugees and migrants from the United States, from southern states, from coastal states, from places like California. Refugees are going to be American. They're not going to come necessarily from other countries. But the Green New Deal offers us a blueprint like the actual New Deal did, which said, in the face of incredible economic collapse, in the face of massive unemployment and straight up hunger, what are we going to do? We're going to put people to work building infrastructure, roads that haven't been retrofitted until today. So Green New Deal says, hey, we need jobs. We have crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. In your house right now, you can't keep heat and you can't keep the cool. I don't know what that is. Let's retrofit our homes. Let's retrofit our buildings. Let's have transportation, public transportation that is better and faster, more efficient. So it really does lay out this possibility of the ways that maybe we can get back to whatever moment in history we're looking to when we talked about how exceptional we were. And again, this is very much based on how we emerged out of World War II, which was the hegemon on top, helping other countries, etc. Industrially, as you said, very much more advanced than other countries. That's what the Green New Deal is. So it's so ironic that the right wing gets all their panties in a bunch, about the Green New Deal, when in fact it kind of is the best opportunity toward our American exceptionalism. It's like the most America first policy you could ever have without the anti-Semitism.
And we'll leave it at that. Francesca, thanks so much for joining the program. And that's all for us today. You can catch this again on demand. We also have this as a podcast later in the week, and we'll have, you can check out all of American Context's programming at americancontext.substack.com. Check out Francesca's show, News Broke on AJ+.
Yay. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you, and thanks for watching.